You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
What I'm trying to say is Taco Bell has everything as the same thing on the menu, just rolled into a different shape and branded as a different thing with different prices. And it all makes you sick. Anyway, welcome to a Life from the Ruins podcast. Carlton, take it from here.
Well, yes. Welcome indeed to a Life in Ruins podcast, episode 164. We're going to investigate the careers of those living life in ruins. I'm your host, Carlton Gover, joined by my co-hosts, Connor Johnnon and David Howe. Just the three of us this week. We haven't, I guess it's been a couple weeks since we've done a podcast together. I guess it's 2-3 weeks.
Yeah, take less than a month for sure.
Since we've all been on one. Yeah. What was the last one? That was...
the Homo Naledi.
Okay. Yeah, the burial practices.
That was a good episode.
Yeah,
I was listening to that
good.
again on my way back. Or my way to Oklahoma.
I guess we should start off by apologizing if you guys had to listen to whatever crap Zencastr published this week for the show that Carlton and I did together. We'll apologize for that. We have no idea what's going on. Let us know if it's better, worse. It's actually really funny, and we did not fuck up that bad.
Yeah, it happened to David like a week ago too. When that episode
listening
dropped.
to yours with Charles, Connor, like it just kept repeating random things.
Right?
Yeah, and it seems to be only Apple, Chris said. So if you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts.
Happened to me on Spotify yesterday.
Did it?
Yeah, and it was a downloaded episode, but it was the same thing. It would just cut mid-segment, and it would like repeat segments. Like I think the end of segment 2, it just cut me off and then went into an ad, but like the latter half of an ad.
Yeah, that happened to me too.
It was like really weird. So I don't know what's up with it. So if you guys are listening to this episode and it does that, contact us immediately, because oftentimes we don't listen to these episodes the day they come out. So if you're having issues listening, email us at lifeandruinspodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us on any of our socials and we'll get it over to Chris, because this has been happening across the Archaeology Podcast Network.
I just thought Charles talked in circles a lot, and I was like, damn, he already said that.
No, he's like he's very eloquent and speaks very direct and very
great interview, by the way. It was good.
Yeah, only because he was good. So it was easy to talk to him, and I see him every day. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun talking to him. But you can also send a bunch of hate to Zencastr too if you feel like it. There's nothing wrong.
They sponsor us, so maybe we don't know that.
I don't know. I'm just saying. Like,
well, until I see a fucking dime from Zencastr, fuck them. For that ad campaign they were supposed to do, we were supposed to get all this money. I haven't seen it yet, so I mean, like, until our bank account expands,
As my grandmother would say, what can you do?
What can you do?
What can you do? But yeah, well.
So, Carlton, you were gone last week. No, when did you leave? You went on an adventure recently, like Bilbo running into the Misty Mountains.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I had an impromptu trip back to Pawnee, Oklahoma. I was going to go originally for Pawnee Nation Homecoming. Decided against it because I needed to get some work done. But then, unfortunately, my uncle passed away, so I had to go back for the funeral. And so, because it happened during homecoming, a lot of my family, we all just kind of stayed for not only the funeral and the cultural practices surrounding the mourning time, but then went to stayed for homecoming because like we were all there, so we decided to attend.
What is homecoming?
So homecoming, Pawnee Nation Homecoming powwow started in 1946 by my grandfather and a couple other veterans. And the whole purpose of homecoming was to, every year around July 4th weekend, bring Pawnees from across the country for a Pawnee-specific powwow where a bunch of different songs and dances would occur in events. So that's where it started, was back in 1946 when all the World War II vets got together to host it. So it's hosted by the Pawnee Nation veterans. They're the ones that are supposed to be running it, the Pawnee Veterans Organization. So it's very much like contemporary powwow stay. There's like a lot of intertribal songs and contests. No, Pawnee Nation powwow is like Pawnee, a lot of war songs, and very specific. It's all just Pawnee music and activities. So it brings people.
That's cool. I think we've talked about this. I don't know if we've talked about it directly on the podcast, but the Pawnees in general have kind of at least like a warlike culture, or there is some emphasis in it.
Yeah, so I mean, we're very much a warrior society. So Haduska society is what we call it, and a lot of that happens really around, like, looking at the archaeological record. The developments of our warrior society really developed like during that medieval global warming period in the 1400s, but then really takes off during American or Euro-American colonization as more tribes are putting pressure onto the plains. The Lakotas show up and others, and that's where we really see our warrior society take off. And then once we are enlisted by the United States Cavalry as scouts, that transforms, that form of service completely transforms into in a whole different context. So like even today, veterans hold a very, and especially combat veterans, like everyone else. I know Matt listens to this and he might agree, but like if you're in a meeting and there's a combat veteran, it doesn't matter, or if there's a veteran and you're not, you are overruled all the time. And if there's a combat veteran, like they take precedence. Like that, we have like kind of this rank society where definitely military service is very much put on a pedestal for the right reasons. So like in part of Pawnee culture, like when you, or in general Indian culture today, if you go to a powwow, one of the things you're supposed to do as a dancer is provide like a gift to the host or the drum. Pawnees are the only tribe of the country that don't have to do that because we've already given enough blood for this country that we don't have to give anything else. So like we have this weird like status even within North American Indian societies, is like our warrior society and our service to the United States is recognized on a different level of like, okay, we have a special status.
It's pretty intense because like there's way more Navajo than any other nation, I'd imagine. But like
Lakota's recently beat them.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so Lakota's, I think they're both over 200,000 enrolled tribal citizens each. But yeah, then there's like Pawnee Nation with like 4,000 now, and we have a very specific like status within. And like a lot of powwow culture today, especially if you go, there's a northern style and a southern style. Those are the predominant ones. Most southern style powwows, the songs are Pawnee songs. Often, more often than not. There's some other ones you can listen to, some Comanche ones and Kiowas, but like a lot of songs are Pawnee songs because a lot of our culture is still very much intact because of a lot of our service to the United States, but also just like how deeply organized the Pawnee Nation was even after removal and keeping these songs. Because it also goes in the residential school system, how like we didn't have to go so far, even though it was a boarding school, it was still within the Pawnee Reserve. So we didn't, some did go to Carlisle, the really horrific one in Pennsylvania, don't get me wrong. But generally we didn't have that same cultural degradation as like the Navajos did, who were like trained out to Ogden, or the Lakotas who were all brought out. It was very much like we were close by, and you can't just like beat Pawnee kids. Now some atrocities did occur, but like their parents are like 2 miles away, and like the tribe is all around. Like if you're gonna like systematically fuck up children, you're gonna die, right? Yeah. So we have some of those cultural protections built in.
I should state for the record, I think the statistic I was referring to was Navajo's the most spoken indigenous language in the United States, the second most in North America. It's not population, I don't think.
It was though, like recently it changed. So they used to have the highest population, and like everything you said is absolutely correct. Just like within this past year in Indian country, it's like there's more Lakotas now, and as a Pawnee, that sucks. But for them, good for them.
Yeah,
you guys get along very well, right?
Very well. But they're almost Lakotas. I know it's just all teasing. We don't take those things to heart.
Oh, sorry. Follow-up question would be like, I know the Navajo code talkers were like a specific thing or whatever, but with the Pawnee being so involved in World War II, was there any specific roles that they filled, or were they just any other combat veteran?
Most of them were combat vets. Actually, my grandfather was a Pawnee code talker, and so is his brother. So they were awarded the Congressional Code Talker medals in 2012. I have like a copy in my room.
Thanks,
I have
Obama.
a couple of copies of those things. It's just because in part of that warrior society, back in the National Guard days, the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, was the most racially diverse National Guard unit in the country. So they were like all Indian units. And so like a lot, like my grandfather and a lot of Pawnees, they all went to the National Guard, and they were all in like the same company. Like they were all 45th, 179th Division Bravo Company, all infantry. And so, because most of the guys are Pawnees or someone else, like they were speaking code, like they were just speaking. So there are a lot of tribes. The Navajo are very well known for their service in the Marine Corps, where the Marine Corps only used Navajo code talkers. The U.S. Army in Europe, specifically with the National Guard units, they had access to like more tribes, especially in Oklahoma. So they were using like damn near like each division, or a lot of these units had their own, using their own codes of their own languages. So you'd have like, one headquarters tent that had a bunch of different Indians in it speaking to their units on the front line. So they would be speaking Pawnee or Kiowa. So there's a lot more code talkers than people recognize. But the Navajo code is very specific to the Marine Corps, where the Marines we're only using this, and heavily recruited from the Navajo.
I guess for the audience listening who might not know about what we're talking about, is that the United States military, and I guess the English too, used Native American languages to speak to each other across communications, so that the Japanese and the Germans couldn't like figure out the code. What they couldn't figure. Yeah, pretty cool.
Like they had no idea, because they didn't have access to basically the anthropological records. Like today, I don't know, you can get away with it. But back then, these are native speakers. Like my grandfather, he was raised by his grandparents who came from Nebraska, right? Like he knew Pawnee, and he also knew Plains Indian Sign Language. So those are like first generation. They grew up speaking Pawnee, so they were very fluent when those code talkers were. So yeah, we have the medals. I think my dad and uncle almost left it in a taxi in DC.
Shit.
There's like some story behind it. Like after the ceremony, they were in a taxi, and they each thought the other brother grabbed it, and they had to like chase the taxi down to get this fucking medal. So yeah, so we have this very much. So this homecoming is to recognize to recognize that. So we have, everyone hears of Indian princesses. We do actually have princesses, but they're very much a modern day thing. So we have, I know we have at least 2, maybe 3, but we have the Pawnee Nation princess, but we also have the Pawnee Nation Veterans Princess. And so that gets awarded at the powwow. And so there's duties and responsibilities with that. So like being a princess today, that's usually a high school girl, carries a lot of weight. Like they're supposed to be ambassadors for our tribe. So even at our homecoming, there were other tribes' princesses there. Like they have to attend, and there's like a section for other princesses. So it's a really interesting, like as an anthropologist, I look at that, because princesses are not an ancestral or traditional thing. That is very much a modern,
like Western
Western thing that we've picked up, and they're pretty cool.
Is there like a word that they would use previously to describe that and had a similar role, or is it a completely new role that's kind of adopted from kind of Western interaction with Western culture?
The latter.
Okay.
Because it's just a latter thing. It's a very much a newer thing. And like powwows themselves are also very new amalgamations. Like I think they really started showing up really in the 1900s.
Nico Holt told me it was like because of the Buffalo Bill show and stuff like that. Like, to make Americans like view, I mean, not like natives as if they're an exhibit, but like, just something that New Yorkers had never had contact with,
Yeah. So a lot of roots of like indigenous led, because we also had our Wild West show was Pawnee Bill's world. So there's Buffalo Bill and there's Pawnee Bill. Those were the 2 major shows. Oh, okay. Buffalo Bill used a lot of Lakotas, and what did Pawnee Bill use? A lot of fucking Pawnees. So those are the roots of it. And so that's why like a lot of powwow songs are Pawnee songs. So like we have a very firm root into powwow culture in that way. But it was a fun time. This was the first year, granted, because of the funeral, and my uncle that passed away, he's a Vietnam combat vet. And out of respect for him and my family, because he was also helped run Pawnee Veterans Organization, and he helped run these things. And he's also the guy who is in charge. He was also a South Band chief, and he run Kuskahadu, our Wichita visitation, which we're really kind of worried about, because no one wants to take that up anymore. So, and the reason why he's South Band is because the guy that used to run Kuskahadu picked my uncle, and in order to do it, he had to switch bands. So he was Skee-Dee, and then he went to Pittahawidata, and that was a very significant choice that kind of followed him the rest of his life, because he lost all credibility within the Skee-Dee band. Because like, you don't want to be SCAD anymore? Fuck it. You don't have a say in our meetings or how SCADs run things. Like, it was a big deal that he had to do, and I respect him for it. Because he, Cusco, we've been doing that for 300 years at least. So like, he picked that up and has run it. So Homecoming is supposed to run 4 days, but because of the funeral, it got condensed into 2, which was it caused some issues. But I mean, it's not like, yeah.
Question. I mean, I don't want you to speak on behalf of all Pawnee veterans, but have you overheard stories, or like, do you know any opinions on like what it's like for Indigenous Americans to fight for the country that killed them?
So I'm not privy to those conversations.
Okay.
It's like, that's like our warrior society. You can only be in that if you're a veteran.
Sure.
So like, the stories that I've heard is like, before the World War II guys went to war, all the Pawnee scouts that were still alive who fought the Lakotas back in the day, they got them all together and like taught them things and like told them stories, which they then utilized in Italy and North Africa and Germany. Like, they taught them the old tricks of the trade. Like, this is when you do night missions. This is how you do this. This is what you need to do to prepare. So that's still moved on from war to war. And then the World War II guys taught it to the Vietnam guys. The Vietnam guys taught it to Desert Storm, and
yeah.
So they've kept that knowledge. So it's still there, but it's within our warrior society.
I mean, it makes sense, because if the Japanese or the Germans were to take over the continent, like, they would also be taken over too. So, I mean, it's better to fight against them. I don't know.
Well, I mean, for us, because we never went to war with the United States, our original 1818 treaty that was signed June 18th, my birthday, we agreed to fight with the United States in perpetuity. So even though the United States is backed out on that treaty, like, the way that our nation looks at it is like, we are still upholding our end of the bargain. So like, I know some vets, that's how they cope. It's like, well, we're just upholding to what we said we would do, not necessarily these ideas of freedom or the United States or terrorism. It's like, we have an obligation as part of this treaty to fight for the United States in times of war.
Gotcha. Fascinating.
So,
yeah, it's very fascinating. I think on that note,
yep.
We'll end this first segment, and we'll be right back with episode 164 of A Life in Ruins podcast.
And we're back to episode 164. So outside of just kind of like general this background, this was the first year that Homecoming wasn't. So it's usually held at the high school football field, which is a little bit down the road, and it's off the reserve. It's not technically a reservation anymore. It's a reserve because of the district ways. So we brought it. So this is the first year we had it on the reserve at Moe's Yellow Horse Field. And Moe's Yellow Horse is the first full-blooded Indian to have played Major League Baseball. He played for the Pirates. So we held it there on the reserve, and it was just so much nicer, like actually being on the reserve. And then everyone camps. You get campsites. So usually everyone camped on the reserve anyway. So rather than having to drive down the street, which isn't, terribly far, but you would have to drive down, you could just walk. Like, we had to take chairs up for family, like me and my cousin. And by the time we had put the chairs in the truck, driven the truck, and parked it, everyone who had walked was already there. Like, it was nowhere. It wasn't far at all. And it's a lot more fun because you're like in camp and you can hear, even if you're not up there, you can hear the drums and you can hear the music. And there's like basketball courts up there too. So like a lot of the kids were playing basketball. It was a lot more open space. It's not in the woods. And it just felt much better. Because the last time I was at a homecoming was as a kid. I usually go back for like dances and other like band specific things. But just because like the past couple of years, this weekend is in the middle of field season.
Yeah.
So I haven't been able to go back for this in a long time just because of work. But here, because of the funeral, a lot of my family was there. And, even it was kind of like funny because we had talked about like death a couple weeks ago. So like during this mourning ceremony, like MOURNING for my uncle, it's like a 3-day event that ends with a feast, and it's all ceremony. So I don't want to get into it, but there was this, I mentioned this in our group chat with Shane and Jesse, but a lot of us were so concerned about fucking up because like we're kind of used to being yelled at as kids, especially. And a lot of us still think that way. Now they're all adults with their own kids, but we still think about when we were kids and getting yelled at for stuff. So after we buried my uncle, we have to go back to the Pawnee Nation Roundhouse for the mourning feast. And we were all like, we got to go. There's no time to dilly-dally. And even some of my cousins wanted it, their parents had passed, so they wanted to visit their gravestones, so they had to be quick about it. So we're all super concerned to get back in time because God forbid we were late. But right as the service was going to start, we heard like the door creak open. Everybody in the roundhouse is like looking towards the entrance. And this woman and her family come in holding those Sonic Route 44 mega cups and then dragging this cooler. And the only way I can describe it, it's like that scene from Men in Black when Will Smith is like dragging the table across the room in white to do the test. That's what it sounded like. And everyone was fucking pissed. And the headman of the ceremony, he gets up, the room's divided, the roundhouse is divided in two. You have family on one side, you have guests on the other. And like part of this ceremony is like, it's my uncle's last meal with everybody. And so a family, this is the coolest thing about being Indian is like, there's a family that took care of us so we wouldn't have to do it. So a family, they fed us, like they made all the meals for my family and for the guests. And you can't say no. So like, we were breaking out Ziploc bags. So like, there's no saying no to food. You have to take it. So, but you basically take like leftovers too at the same time. But as the headman is giving his speech, he like looks to us and he starts going on this rant about how inappropriate it was to bring in Route 44s. So my uncle and aunt immediately get up and they start surveying the rest of us to look if we had brought tea. Because we were all like, nope. And for once, it wasn't us that got in trouble. But we'd been talking about it when that woman came in because it was hot down there. And I was like talking with my cousins, like, man, that actually like a Route 44 sounds great. But after that person got chewed out publicly in front of the tribe for doing that, we were like, well, thank God we didn't fucking stop at Sonic on the way home. But then we just started making memes about the whole incident, like, because that how it goes. Like my family, especially, like humor is a big deal. So like after a day, we found some funny photos of my uncle and memed the shit out of him, like that face when you bring a Route 44 sweet tea to the morning feast and get caught, stuff like that. And then after that was done, we technically done mourning, and we can kind of have a little bit more brevity to have quote unquote fun and just be home. Because it was fun being able to see, Matt and his role. Matt is still a South Band chief who we've had on the podcast before, and at that powwow, he's up front on center stage, judging people. He's part of the whole process. It was a lot of fun, and it was just fun to be around family, have the teepee set up, and just to be fed so much food, and just to be around so many Pawnees because there's teepees all over the place. Everyone's pretty much in regalia, and it's a really good time. And tribes, and even like tribal police from other tribes, they show up to help out, so that way our tribal police can participate. So it's this really cool like coming together of like Indians across Oklahoma to participate and be there for one another. And like our homecoming is like noted as one of the top things to do in Oklahoma for July 4th weekend. And it's free and public to anybody. Yeah, people can come all the time. Yeah. You don't have to jump in. There's a lot of folks from other tribes that come. And even some people, because they come from mixed Indian families, when they dance, like they're wearing, you can tell real quickly who's not Pawnee based on their regalia. And so, but we do have like Northern style and stuff like that. But it's just like a fun time just to be Pawnee for a weekend and be around everyone. It's just a good time. And like camp hop was always fun. Fucking Matt set up his teepee. It was funny because you can tell why he did it. Like he set up his teepee right in the shaded part of a tree, but next to the tree was this huge lamppost. And like the first time I saw it, the lamppost just empties completely into his teepee flap. And I was making fun of him for it. He's like, he hardly got any sleep because the whole thing was just lit from the inside. But like even the campsites, they have water and power. So like there was the camp next door. They had 2 rotating fans in the center of a circle, so they could all get blasted with AC. It was just a funny time, and it's hard. It's like fun being able to go in those places. And I was like asking family, I was like, you guys ever brought friends or like dates to homecoming? And like most of them were like, no, usually you have to be married. I'm like, is it against protocol? They're like, no, it's just like I don't want my family to fucking like tease the fuck out of anyone I bring, you know what I mean? Like they wouldn't be my friends or girlfriend again after they like a weekend with the family, because everyone's just hyped up,
Yeah. Did you ask about fellow podcasts co-hosts. Is that
my uncle was asking about you two, and Matt was too. He's like, oh, he's like, are David and Connor here? And I'm like, no, I let them sit out. Like I need to be back first and then scope out the land, and then next year because I imagine because I kept thinking like it'd be cool. Like I really wish I'd brought my stone toolkit. Because that would have been a perfect time, especially just sitting with everybody, because we were all just visiting, like to sit down and make stone tools. That would have probably gone a huge way to do that. And people were just asking, catching up. And now, like a bunch of more of my family are starting to get PhDs. So we got into like a weird academic space at one point, talking about like indigenous ontologies and teaching. It was just like, dude, I don't want to talk about this right now. Like, I don't want to talk about academia at this.
You want to take a step back, especially with all your last couple years, which has been turbulent at best.
Yeah, but it was good. There's only a couple tribes, and I think about it, like there's a Potawatomi one, and you have to be Potawatomi. Like they check, like you have to have a CIB, or you have to show proof that you're related to someone with a CIB to get in. Like they do the fraternity "Who do you know here?"
CIB
thing, Certificate of Indian Blood, the Indian card.
Okay,
like you have to show enrollment or descendancy to be able to get in. But generally those things are just open to the public. But the dances are really fun. I mean, it's not just traditional stuff. Like there's the 2-step where all the guys are out there and then women basically choose their dance partner.
Did you get picked?
I did. And I felt so bad because like what had happened was there's what had happened. Like there's a friend of mine from the museum board. She's on it. And we were just chatting. And but I was over by her family section, and I just kind of like she's like, "Was everything okay with your family?" And I looked over, and everybody had their eyes on me, and I started getting texts like, "Who are you talking to?" I was like, "Oh fuck!" And then I just started seeing making jokes, and then immediately it's like the 2-step came on. She's like, "Oh, the 2-step's on." I was like, "And I'm gonna go get a lemonade," and just fucking booked it, and just like got out of there. And then when I was getting a lemonade, I met some folks from Colorado that I used to work with, and we were all just kind of chatting. And I felt so bad. I was like texting her. I was like, "I'm so sorry." Like I went to the blah 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 blah. And then went back, and for the rest of the fucking weekend, that's all I heard was just like, "Who's your friend? Like, where's your friend at? Like, why were you late? Were you visiting your friend?" I'm like, "Calm the fuck down."
God, that's such a family thing to do every time, especially when you're single. It's like, "Who's that girl? Who were you talking to?" It's like I was talking to a female. That happened.
But that happens. But then like that's how a couple of my cousins met their first wife, or that's who's their mom type of shit. You know what I mean? So like it's common. But after the powwow, and this is something I learned completely new this year, everyone kept talking about the 49. Like, is there a 49 this year? Like, who's going to go to the 49? I was like, what the fuck is a 49? They're like, oh, you don't know, do you? And I was like, what is it? So 49 is in reference to these 49 Apaches or something. There was like 300 of them that went on the war trail, and only 49 came back. And they came back, they sang these like war songs and like love and stuff like that. But nowadays, a 49 is what all the deviants do after a powwow, where they pick a place and they bring a drum and they sing like love songs, and everyone gets drunk and drinks and usually gets busted up by the police later that night, which is a whole part of powwow culture I had never heard of, like, because I was too little when I was a kid to know what a 49 was. But everyone kept talking about it. I kept hearing like 49 stories of different years and places that it was held. And like usually the fights that happened there, or the girls that got caught, the people got cheating, or cool stuff. But it was like really weird, like, because I was thinking as an anthropologist, it was like, this is based on a historical event in which these songs were sung to commemorate these 49 out of 300 coming back, and now we've turned it into something wildly different to what it used to be, where it's like you can go out afterwards and drink and smoke and you sing like those ridiculous, like the modern day powwow songs where they're like have the love stories and stuff in them that are in English, not in Indian. But this year they didn't have any. They had a sober one at the grounds, which were like, okay, a sober 49, fuck it. So like we all just went back to camp and we were like, well, we'll just pregame the sober 49. And by the time we got up there, like 10 minutes later, it was already over. We were like, what the fuck? So it was just like, huh.
That sounds like a sober gathering.
Yeah, and well, no one really showed up. It's like, yeah, because we all went to pregame the sober 49. Like you had it immediately after the powwow. We all had to go and take a couple shots to come back to this. You guys just didn't wait long enough. But it was cool. Yeah, no, I'd like to have you guys come out maybe next year, the year after, because it's just like a fun 4 days. And a lot of food. It's a lot of fun. A lot of stories are told, and that's where like a lot of people start talking about some of the older stuff that had happened, or especially like younger kids are then asking their grandparents or great grandparents history and family facts, and that's where a lot of that transfer of knowledge is occurring, is at these camps, because these camps aren't like single family units of mom, dad, their kids. Like a camp is the entire extended family. Like my camp was my great uncle and my great aunt's kids, their kids. And like, so there's all of us are in one spot. Like everyone with the last name Gover or used to have the last name Gover is in one place at this campground. All
That's
catching
wild.
up. Yeah. And that's how all the other families are, you know? So you go to these camps and there's like several dozen people that know each other.
So it's an aggregation.
Yeah, it's like this aggregation. It's a murder of Govers or whatever it is. And yeah, they're a fun time. And it's part of, like, especially in Oklahoma culture, there's the powwow summers where you could go as like a professional. If you wanted to live as a powwow dancer, you could do it all summer in Oklahoma, because every weekend there's a powwow somewhere, you know, and you could just go dance at all these different powwows and make it. And like a lot of high school kids do it. I've always wanted to see an Apache crown dance. Those look super cool. Never seen one before. That's the one that have the huge headdresses with like the sticks and stuff. Because like Oklahoma is that weird place where like tribes from the East Coast to the West Coast, like there's some like California tribes that ended up in Oklahoma. So you get basically, if you wanted a charcuterie board of powwow culture, go to Oklahoma, because you could see all these different.
Well, that's the name of the episode.
The charcuterie board of powwow culture, and you know there's a lot of non-Indians there too. Like there are hobbyists, is what they're called. Hobbyists will show up.
Powwow hobbyists, is that
powwow hobbyists? It's a thing where people do it as a hobby, and they like usually have the best stuff. The Germans are huge powwow hobbyists. They have like a really weird like fetish with Native Americans.
That's wild.
They go super hard. But like I didn't sing it. I was like looking around. There's a lot of jewelers and silversmiths. No one was flint napping. And like we had been talking, especially with David recently, about flint napping. There wasn't a single. I didn't see anyone working stone.
Check my last video on my YouTube. Yeah, that's interesting, dude. Because that's something I noticed. Just not a single indigenous. Someone was like, "My daddy's Choctaw," and I was like, "I doubt it."
Yeah, I'm saying you bring in the ethnocynology bus and let's pull out some stones and just start working.
Yeah, man. I just love to hear about dogs and stuff from those people too, if they wouldn't mind. But I do, like, again, like I pointed out in that video, though, I do feel weird going to a very indigenous event and just being like, "Hey, remember this thing you used to do that was your way of life? Watch this white dude do it, but I'm Jewish." And then
you get away with it more than I do.
I'm part of a tribe. No, wouldn't go over well.
Yeah, but you're not like, because I've seen it.
I'm not an asshole.
No, you're not. No, I've seen. You're not the person that's like, I'm saving your culture. You're just participating. You know, like David's not that kind of guy that shows up. Like, if it wasn't for me, you'd have lost this knowledge. It's like, fuck you, dude. David's not that guy. No, but everyone was kind of asking about that kind of stuff, especially recently. That, you know, Pawnee history back in the day and how things were set up, and people were asking about stone tools. And they're like, "So what kind of arrowhead did we use? Was it different?" I'm like, "No, well, it's a thing called plain side notch, and you find it from Alberta down to Texas. It's kind of like the ubiquitous, this is the mastery of arrowhead technology right here. This is what we all used."
Yeah, you can get that in the West too. Yeah. I mean, the desert tri-notch, the only other thing is they add a little thing in the bottom. But yeah, that stuff exists basically across the whole U.S. at that time.
Just imagine like a Steve Jobs Pawnee, and he's like, "All right, so you had this one. We added another notch. Now the software in this one is outdated, and you're going to have to buy the tri-notch."
He's wearing that turtleneck too and everything.
He hates his employees.
Turtleneck.
Buckskin. I want a buckskin turtleneck, please. I'll probably die of heat exhaustion, but I still want one.
Yeah, it was a whole. It was just fun to be around, because like usually the past couple of years at powwows, they're intertribals or I'm up in Shoshone land, but it was cool just to see all the Pawnee swag and what everyone's doing. And you guys have seen that. I showed you that picture where I got that new ribbon shirt and the sleeves are dangling off the edge. I showed that to my sisters and they fucking lost it. I was like, "Where's your ribbon shirt?" I'm like, "So funny thing." And like showed them the photo and they're like, "Holy shit, what the fuck happened?" And I was just like, they didn't understand the measurements.
Yeah.
So they're like, "Give it to us and we'll fix it for you." I was like, "Thank you." Because it's
On
supposed to be
that
those women
note,
are supposed to be a blouse. They're based off of a French blouse. That's why they're longer in certain parts. So,
did not know that.
One time we got, I mean, this is irrelevant, but I had to order a suit for a friend's wedding, like rent one, and the shirt measurements were so far off that the shirt came down to like past my knees, and the company was like, "Can you send a photo and let us know what's wrong with it?" And I just held my like hands out, and it was like down to my feet, and I said, "Yes, you sent me a shirt from the Nation of Islam."
like Gimli with the chainmail, it's a little tighter on the
Literally,
chest.
it's just like, how do you fuck the measurement up that bad?
Was this my wedding?
Possibly, or it was Sam's. I can't remember. I think it was your wedding.
Yours
'cause
was
all the shirt
also
project.
yours was also messed up, and Michael blew through his pants. And on that note,
Right.
we are going to end this segment, and we will be right back with episode 164 of our Life in Ruins podcast.
Welcome back to episode 164, Nintendo 64 of our Life in Ruins podcast. I'm your host, David Howe, joined by my co-hosts, Connor Johnen and Carlton Gover. Carlton, that was a fascinating talk. I appreciate it.
The carton of milk. Thank you for that.
Missing child. But yeah, Connor and I wanted to talk about Warren, a mammoth site in Wyoming. And the goal of this site was to find out if it was killed by humans or not. And that is very likely a no. But it is 100 years. It died 100 years before Clovis arrives in Wyoming. So it was like a pretty like interesting, like possible, but it just was an elephant that died. I don't know. How do you want to go about this?
It's paleontological, not archaeological.
Yeah. So and the story of this comes from the landowner at the time was digging. I think he was digging a well, or a water line or something. Ends up popping through something. I think he sees the tusks, or he sees some part of
the guy doing the excavator, Gerardo. He found like the femoral head, and he was like, "Oh shit, a dinosaur bone."
Yeah, and then they proceeded to contact the University of Wyoming and bring us out there because we are interested in mammoths, or people in our department are very interested in mammoths and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of set off a series of events that brought us to there.
Yeah, and the reason Spencer got called the state archaeologist and Todd was because the guy originally called the paleontology department, and because it was a mammoth found like at that level in Wyoming, pretty close to like other mammoth sites, they were like, I don't know if they carbon dated it first there or not with the paleontology. Regardless, they were like, you need to contact the SHPO, or like the state ALZA, Office of the Wyoming State Archaeologist, because it's probably archaeological if it's that young, which is why it was excavated archaeologically, because paleontologists just kind of dig around the bone, not looking for tiny microdebitage of stone tools around it. So
yeah, and I think that their preservation is the same. So like ultimately they find almost all the elements of it. They're missing a tusk. They've got missing a mandible, the lower mandible. Is that?
Yeah, from what I saw.
Yeah, the jaw, but they have lots of elements, and I think paleontologists would do the same thing we do, which is we cast it, save it, and go deal with it in the future.
Yeah,
but the surrounding methods are significantly different. Like you wouldn't dig 1 by 1 meter units with a shovel or anything if you were doing it paleontologically.
Yeah, they would just carve right in, kind of.
Just blow through it.
But digging there last year for the whole time, it was like they knew where the femoral head was, so we started blocks that way. Hang on one second. Perfectly loud. They found the femoral head, so the trench that was opened went past that to see where like the direction in which the bone should go. And as those units kept opening up, it was just like more and more long bones, more and more verts, more and more just like everything. And it was so cool to I time lapsed all of it. So like just seeing a mammoth just slowly come out of the ground was really cool. And it was a female, I think full grown elephant. And I remember standing there looking at the femur and then the tibia or the fibula. We couldn't tell which one it was at the time, but measured that and then measured the femur, and that was already taller than me. So like like just put the tape measure next to me, so I wasn't even up to this thing's fucking shoulder. Columbian mammoths are huge.
Yeah, and the way it landed, or the way it kind of stopped and was preserved, is face down, which is not how mammoths fall. Not
Yeah,
generally, unless they're tripping. Unless you trip on a rock real bad and go face first, you generally just fall in place or while you're running or whatnot.
I thought it was ass up the way it fell. I can't remember
Well, it's face down, ass up. That's the way they like to preserve.
Because we were looking at the bottom of the mandible the bottom of the maxilla was sticking out of the ground. But like that's what I took pictures of, at least. But the rest of the body could have been the other way. I don't remember. Like I just, you're probably right.
Okay.
Either way, it wasn't like killed and butchered. It just like died and then got like flooded over and deposited in sediment.
Lots of post-step stuff, lots of movement of bones and whatnot. So that's interesting. It was fun to be a paleontologist for the weekend.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, this year they had a bunch of stuff exposed. They found the tusk, which was super cool. Yeah, it was just like one of those cool things. A lot of people came out that I haven't seen in years, just like because everyone wants to come see a mammoth. Yeah.
Also, some of the best field accommodations you could have. There's a house.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. I'm always given beer or food.
There was we had a question from someone on the Ruins podcast recently. They're interested in doing archaeology in graduate school, and asked like, "Hey, so they asked about accommodations and like just asked like, so what can I expect?" And what I had to tell them was, it depends on the project. It has nothing to do with the kind of archaeology you're doing or where you're located. It has everything to do with the project itself, what the funds are, what the deal is. You could be in a hotel, you could be in a tent, you could be in a car. It all just depends.
Yeah. I feel like you could, and funding can vary, but it's the way the people organize it and take into account stuff. Because I've heard horror stories, and especially like overseas, of people not being prepared to be in that country, speak the language, or anything like that, and having like a completely awful time. They had all the money in the world to do that, but they never took the steps to go actually do that. So it's really is a crapshoot, and checking with people who've taken field schools before is probably like the most important thing you could do.
Yeah, and I guess a good way to answer the kid's question too would be like, if it's a historical archaeological thing in the middle of a city, obviously you can't camp, so you probably get a hotel, where there's some kind of like apartment you rent. The school will organize that, or the project. But like where we work in the middle of the desert in Wyoming, it's like you just camp out right next to the site, because why not? It's way cheaper.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, and the nearest hotel is like an hour away, and it's going to be like in the town of Buffalo that has maybe a Motel 8 if you're lucky,
or,
so it's
or
like
Scum Dance.
Yeah, it's like very much like, at Hellgap. What are you going to do? Camp in Guernsey? That's like it's just not.
No, Hartville. We're going to Sunrise, man.
Yeah, so, yeah, that was.
Well, Lynch was weird because you guys were in like a monastery or like in an old church.
Yeah,
thing, right?
Lynch was
priory.
Weird. The first year they were out there, they did camp at the site, and used the landowner's house, and it quickly, with like 8 kids and the landowner, it was just too busy, and so then we were able to set up accommodations in a Catholic maternity hospital turned into basically a bed and breakfast.
It's a wild turn.
Very wild turn. And then, like in the fucking Dominican Republic, I'm staying at a Sports Illustrated timeshare, so it's like all very much like, I don't know what to say. I'm very excited to go back next week and get back in there and live at a goddamn all-inclusive resort for a week and have a whole place.
Is the flight and stuff paid for too? I guess that's a question we should ask for someone listening.
My research budget's covering it.
Okay, but for students doing the field school there,
if you don't have a research budget, that's the deal. It's like you got to pay. The prices weren't too bad. Like I think mine total was like $800, and I only booked it like a week ago, so like a 3-week notice to an international flight to the DR. That's usually the catch. If you can afford to get to this project in the DR, everything else is taken care of.
Gotcha.
And that's a pretty sweet deal, I think.
Well, I think there's a like a push and an attempt to make these things cheaper, more affordable, have scholarships, etc., because they are course classes in most cases. So you have to pay the overhead of the school, which can be a lot, and then your travel, usually your food's covered, etc. But there is a push, and there are good organizations out there that will give you scholarships and help and aid with field schools, because they can be painfully expensive.
Yeah.
And it's usually food costs. Like after doing some of the budgets with Doug and Marcel, the single most expensive thing running a project is always food cost. And I know to lighten that load, to make the CU Boulder Field School cheaper, Doug and KC basically were like, breakfast is on your own, which I hated. I think out of the, like, lunch should be on your own. Like breakfast is the most important meal for field school. Having a hot breakfast where you can get the day started and have that energy.
You're right. My whole field school, every meal was on us. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Like breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Yeah.
I'd be miserable.
So, I mean, mostly students spent their weekends like having to go, because like the town of Lynch, their supermarket going to support us, especially some of those Colorado kids that are fucking vegans. Like there's no vegan food in Lynch, Nebraska. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or the vegetables that they needed. So they'd have to go to like Sioux Falls or somewhere to load up. So, I mean,
that's a good point too. Sorry, I'll let you finish there, but are you good? I saw a recent article about like ableism in archaeology and field work and stuff, and it made me think both ways on the topic. But like, there's no way to get around getting into a giant trench with units and digging with a shovel in a wheelchair. Like, you can't do it unless you like made a specific ramp and like, you know, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say you can't. You could do it. It's just, it's already physically demanding enough for people who are able to walk and crawl in there and dig and lift buckets and things. So I do understand, though, that somebody in a wheelchair that can't walk or has, you know, is missing an arm or a leg or something, like they, or somebody with just like RA, like rheumatoid arthritis, that can't do too much. Like, what if they want to be an archaeologist? How do they do it? And like, I guess you would just do mostly lab work, but a lot of the stuff is in the field. So that's another thing you got to think about.
I think and I think there are field schools that you could probably find that are less intensive in those sorts of mobility ways. Maybe something historic where you're going out in the field. Work. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, it seems like a really difficult topic. Like, I think we always want to include everyone, but sometimes the reality of our discipline is that it's backbreaking work in remote areas that are hard to get to, and I don't know, it's difficult.
Yeah, and I don't think that's not a comment onto prejudice against disabled folks in various shapes. It's like it's the same. It can be this very similar to construction work, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you can't physically get there or be able to move or do these things, it's like what you can't. But yeah, I know. And I know there's a very big more push. Like Mississippi State is doing a curatorial field school, so there's definitely a lot more pushes for folks who want to be engaged actively in archaeological collections and parts of the archaeological excavation process to get that training to be able to do the hands-on research, which I'm a huge proponent of. And I do know it sometimes gets tricky with, you know, even one of the things that we faced a lot is single parent households not being able to do field schools because, like, what are their kids doing?
Yeah. Like, you cannot bring your kid most days to, like, it's probably against university policy, let alone like the dangers of bringing someone out to Lynch when it's 100 degrees and miserable.
Or if you're doing school just as someone who runs a family and has to work, like, you can't just leave for 6 weeks for a field school.
Yeah.
4 weeks. Yeah.
Or even when it comes to the diet stuff, like, don't care if you're vegan or vegetarian, but it's like, you better be taking omega-3 pills. Like, if you're not taking your supplements, you will not have a fun time out here. And honestly, I love those kids because especially on hot days, they're like coal mines in the Canaries. If the vegans start going down, I know I need to get everyone else drinking water. They're the first ones to go. And it's like, all right, so now everyone stop what you're doing. Vegans go in the shade, drink water, take your omega-3 pills. Everyone else start chugging.
Yeah.
It's like, there's that rank because they're not getting the, you know, it's just like field work. I don't care about your choices. I mean, there's one poor kid we had one year who was going through a multitude of medical issues. And we we're like, dude, we respect your decision to be a vegan, but you did not bring any of the supplements you needed for you, you are going to eat this fucking chicken breast. Or you will die.
Yeah.
If it helps, it came from down the street. It was an organic, free-range chicken.
Yeah. I mean, the other option is because he would go to town and get food, or
you're
because
done.
you didn't bring it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the supplement issue. It's like they didn't have those lifestyles.
Oh,
you have
I thought you meant supplements as in like pills. I was like, oh.
Like they weren't taking, because a vegan diet does not provide all the necessary nutrients you need. So like it showed. So they didn't bring them. It's like, you can go home, you can fail the course, or like whatever the deal is, or you can just eat this chicken breast and you will be fine.
Yeah. That also reminds me too, when I was doing, I guess I did 2 field schools. Like I did Topper. It was just like a month out there. And then the next month I did my actual like paid for field school. At Topper though, and LaPrelle here in Wyoming and Warren, like there's always like cook rotations, like people help cook, and there's a cooking tent or a cooking kitchen where everyone cooks. And like, then you have like a buffet style, like you walk down the table, like making your dinner essentially. And that was the same at Topper, but at the time it was medically necessary. I was gluten-free, and like everything, it was the South, so everything was just like fried fucking like really delicious food, and I couldn't eat a lot of it. And especially sandwiches at lunch too. So I would just have to eat, cold cuts on its own, and then gluten-free bread tastes disgusting, and you usually have to refrigerate it. So that was hard. But anyway, the person cooking every day would be like, can you eat this? Can you eat this? And I was just learning about gluten-free, and I was like, I think so. And she was like, cornstarch is just corn. And I was like, I don't know, probably not. So she had to make like a specific thing for me and my friend Kelsey, who was also gluten-free. And like behind our back, she would call us the celiac twins, because like she just hated having to cook a separate meal. So just be aware of that, like, and especially the one where I had to bring my own food every time. Like I had a cooler with ice in it, and I just prayed that the ice wasn't melted.
I think you can solve that, at least initially, with the communication with your professors or being upfront about these things. And sometimes you might not be able to do that field school. You might not be able to do it because of your restrictions, and that's just life. That's just the way things are. But you have to upfront tell people these things. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to prep to ultimately, because they have to keep you safe for the next like month or so. And it's rough environments. It's hot. You're going to be miserable. They need to know these things.
And our cook in Wyoming is always like, do you like?
You're muted, Carlton.
Oh,
as that also goes with CRM too. I mean, like when I was doing the Mountain Valley Pipeline project, I always had breakfast, and you have to bring your lunch, bolt around. Like there was sometimes, like there was one part of the project that was like an hour out that we did stop at a gas station, and everyone knows gas stations in the South all have kitchens. And so people started relying on that for breakfast. And then when we weren't going there, half the crew wasn't doing well in the morning because they thought they were going to get like a hot chicken biscuit sandwich. And it's like, you just gotta do it.
Yeah. Well, on that depressing note, I hope you do, like, if you want to do a field school, check with the professors, check with the school, like it should be fine. And I'd say most of them are probably fed, and like you should have accommodations. But if you can't sleep outside in a tent, if you're allergic to pollen, like be upfront about that and make sure you ask those questions. But yeah, be sure to rate and review the podcast. We appreciate it. Thanks for sending us the questions, Connor.
I was just going to add one more thing. Yeah, there is a push in archaeology to work with people with different abilities. So be aware and ask around. We can probably put you in touch with people. So yeah, but thank you once again for listening. We appreciate y'all. Sorry for the Zencaster fuck up if it happened.
Let us know so we can take care of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. That's it.
Peace out.
Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And if you made it this far, you know what time it is. It is time for Connor's witty joke.
I'm gonna come.
What do you call a number that can't keep still? A roaming numeral.
Wow. It's pretty good.
Scraping the bottom of the barrel on that one, Connor.
Oh, that's where I live.
Daddy, chill.
Okay, with that we're out.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.